'cause life is for living. Let's see where this all might lead. Let's see where this all might lead. Waking up to a brand new day in between your sheets.
Cool. All right. So how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's crazy now to finally be speaking, but with the lockdowns on our side again, the third wave, which you guys, I don't know, when you finished your third wave, when was that now? Before the summer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but there's a lot of rumors flying around over here and speculation that they might try another one.
Yeah, I've heard that this side as well, and certainly in Europe as well, because I've got half a business there as well. That after the summer holidays, Holland is gonna go back into another wave. So it's crazy, just what's going on. So let's just
Okay, so wait, something just happened here. Hold on. Okay, yeah. No, so but you're okay. So you said so where are you actually broadcast? Where are you at this morning? I'm just curious. Where are you at this morning?
So today I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa, and yeah, so it's all over Johannesburg, South Africa. Then it's Holland, Amsterdam. So yeah, the show is pretty international, and I'm actually curious how you. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows that follows the show. The show's raw, not researched. I interview guests just completely from from the heart, and just, if I feel someone has a story where, we can discuss truth and how your life journey is connecting with your truth. And that's something that I want to share with everyone. Right. And you reached out to me, to ask if I could interview you. So as I said, it's raw, not researched. I know little about you. I know that you were in jail, you were wrongly convicted, and you're on a mission to turn that awful, that awful experience around for so many people. As you know, I interviewed Jason Baldwin as well, quite a few, in fact, a month after he was released from jail. So it's not per se a conversation, I have expert knowledge on, but it's more about you and your truth and what your journey is, as opposed to, going into deep legalities around things. But, in terms of making people aware, we need to be aware of what's going on and how people's lives are affected by, laws that are in place, or just wrongdoings of human beings, So let's just start with, how did you find us? And, what is it that you're wanting to bring to the conversation?
Sure. Give me 1 second. Just close this window here.
Okay.
Something happens outside, we're not going to pick up the outside noise. Okay. All right. I'm ready. Okay. So
cool. So yeah, what I was saying is, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can. It's a little bit slow, the line, I have to be honest. So my question is, tell us how you found Inspirational Interviews, and, let's get that, big elephant out the way in terms of what is it that you're on a mission to do at the moment?
Yeah, I was researching, researching, podcasts that more like motivational and, inspirational type stories, and on Facebook, and I came across you that way. And in terms of what I'm on a mission to do, I'm on a mission to free people who are wrongfully imprisoned, as well as to pass laws aimed at preventing wrongful convictions from happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, let's go in there then. Tell me, where are you right now? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm from New York, which is, of course, a state in the United States. And by the way, in terms of the mission that I'm on, in terms of doing this work, I started a nonprofit organization back in 2011 called the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And, to date, we have been able to get 11 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned.
Wow.
And we were able to pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction: DNA database expansion, videotaping interrogations, identification reform. I'm an advisory board member of a coalition group called It Could Happen to You, and we were able to pass an additional 5 laws, most of them in New York, but one in Pennsylvania. In New York, we were able to pass a law pertaining to independent oversight for prosecutors, and then also discovery reform, which pertains to sharing information by both sides. So previously, on the eve of a hearing or a trial, that would be where a bunch of evidence and documents would be dumped on an attorney's desk. And obviously, that's not enough time to really review it and incorporate it into strategy. And so now it has to be done automatically very early in the process. And so using that same model of building a statewide organization and focusing on 1 or 2 issues, we have chapters in Pennsylvania and California, which are 2 other states in the U.S. And so I'm active in all three of those states. But I'm also I have a master's degree.
So, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just was going to say that I have a
No.
master's.
I was saying that's. Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say
Jeffrey?
that I do have. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm just wanted to say, I have I have a master's degree. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction cause and reform. And I'm also an attorney. At some point it became not enough for me to sit in the front row of the courtroom, and I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table and to be able to represent some of the clients and make some of the arguments. But really, my motivation in doing all of this is that happened to me myself. So I did spend 16 years incarcerated. I was arrested when I was 16 for murder and rape, which I did not commit, and turned 17 prior to the trial starting. And then I lost the trial. I was my wrongful conviction, which happened despite a negative DNA test, happened by a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender, and lost 7 appeals that I turned down for parole, but ultimately was exonerated through further DNA testing, which identified the actual perpetrator. So that's the motivation for this mission I'm on.
Yeah. Sure. It's and you definitely are in the law field, because the way you're talking, and it's like it becomes music in my ears, because I don't understand like half these terms on everyday language, So let's talk about who's Jeffrey. Like, where's Jeffrey from? Where was he born? Who were you as a child? Like you say you were put in when you were 16 years old.
I was arrested when I was 16. Yeah, I was 17 when I was put in. Yeah. So Jeffrey is from Peekskill, New York, which is in Westchester County. It's the suburbs. It was middle class. It was ethnically diverse. I would say growing up that I didn't think of it this way then, but it's clear to me now that it was kind of like a double life in a way. There was my life after school and my life in school. So after school, there was a lot of kids that lived in that apartment complex where I grew up at. And I was one of the main kids, and meaning that whatever I would suggest would usually be what we would do. If we're going to ride bikes, play Monopoly, go play video games, play basketball, any number of games that we used to do. But in school, I was quiet to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports. I really wasn't into parties or drinking, and so I was kind of on the fringes of the society there. And that was all because really extremely early in my life, I had skipped a grade, and that resulted in there being an age disparity between me and the kids in the high school, and hence the different experiences in living life that I just described. It was me, my mother, my brother, who was 3.5 years younger than me, and my grandmother. So we all lived together. So my father was never involved in my life in any aspect ever.
Yeah. So, and then, so you were shy at school, but in your neighborhood, you were outgoing and you were sort of at the center of all the happenings.
Correct.
I mean, how would you describe yourself now? How would you describe yourself now being, we haven't even gone into the story yet about, Imprisoned, but that was you when you were a child. You went into prison, or teenager, should I say. You went into prison and now you're out. Which side of the fence are you on now?
I'm still in the same position, just ironically, just in a different way. So I sit on a lot of different boards, a lot of different advisory boards, and I'm involved in a lot of different movements and groups, and I assist a lot of other organizations. So in that aspect of it, I'm kind of in the center. In fact, my role in several of the organizations is to reach out to other people and try to get them to join, or even to be a liaison to the exoneree community. So in that aspect of it, I am in the center again. But from a social point of view, the one aspect of my life that I really have struggled tremendously to try to put back together is the social aspect of my life. So I guess you might say I'm kind of on the fringes of it. I mean, most of the time, socially, I'm kind of like I'm an observer. I'm watching from the outside rather than a participant. But that's not really by choice. I mean, it's kind of frustrating, actually. In some aspects, it does feel like I'm still locked up, just in a different way. There's no bars in front of me. I have freedom of movement, but just being locked out of. Yeah. So I guess you might say I'm kind of in that same position again, just, in a different way.
Yeah. Why do you say you're frustrated about it? Where does that come from within you, or why?
Because who would have? I feel frustrated about it because I'm a social person. I'm very outgoing. I think a lot deeply, and I know that's a characteristic of an introvert. But in many ways, I'm an extrovert. So what I mean by that is, if I went out to pre-pandemic, if I went to a nightclub or to a lounge, the ambiance might be great and the music is really good and everybody appears to be having the time of their life. They're socializing, they're chatting, they're dancing, and I'm kind of like I'm there. Okay, I'm there, but I'm watching. I'm not really participating. That part, everybody there is like, young, they're in their 20s, right? And and I think I look pretty good for my age, but let's be clear. Let's be for real. I'm 47, and I know I look every day of my 47 years. So nobody would mistake me for a 25, 26, 27-year-old. So, I'm probably reminiscent of a father figure. So that would be an example of it. Another example might be I might casually talk to someone that's really just an associate or a colleague of mine in one way or another, and they might mention to me what their plans are for the weekend. Yeah, I'm calling this friend, that friend, or in hindsight, we went here, we went there, we did this, we did that. I'm happy for them. I'm glad that they have plans or that they did something fun, but that wasn't what my reality was. Where were the people for me to call up, for me to get together with socially that share 3 or 4 the same interests that I do, that live within a reasonable distance, so we could be spontaneous. It doesn't do me any good that one of my childhood best friends that I'm still in touch with, they live in Illinois. That doesn't do me any good unless I'm going to jump on a plane. But how often are you going to do that just spontaneously? So that's what I really mean.
Yeah. Well, on your first point, I think you're choosing the wrong clubs. You shouldn't be going to clubs with 20-year-olds. You should be going to clubs with 40-year-olds.
Example. Yeah, I know, but there is no place for 40-year-olds that I'm aware of. Okay, you have the younger places, but I stopped. But but then the other thing is true. I went to a place that advertised as having an older crowd, but it's it's like people my grandmother's age. The 70s and 60s, even late 60s. That's I got the two extremes going. There doesn't appear to be a middle place, at least not that I'm aware of. But those are just.
So talk to me then. I understand. That's sort of how you sort of placing yourself at the moment in the social spectrum. But because you spoke about school and how at school you were, the introvert at school, and then, in your neighborhood, you were like the center of, the happenings.
Yeah.
Talk to me about then during, let's go into your time in prison, because this was obviously such a huge time of your life. And I can imagine everyone listening also wanting to sort of get the full picture and understand things. to also really, to feel your journey and to feel your truth. And obviously it's totally, it makes total sense, the journey you're on, that you want to protect people from what you had to go through, which was so wrong. But there must be something deeper almost, and also what I'm curious to know is if the sense to defend was in you before you went into prison.
Well, I did want to be a lawyer prior to going to prison, but it wasn't to do this type of work. It was just because my mother had a personal injury attorney, and he appeared to be well dressed and well respected and well compensated. So I had thoughts of going into the legal field to be a lawyer, but just for other work. But still, there is still something else to what you're saying. I mean, prior to being that's really when I switched thoughts as to what career I wanted to have. But prior to that, prior to being a teenager, I did fantasize about being a police officer when I grew up. And so I guess you might say that was part of the instinct to defend. Sure. But I guess maybe the deeper thing also that's at play. I'm sorry, I just want to finish one answer. But maybe part of the other aspect of the deeper thing that's going on now, which is that, I do make sense of everything that happened to me in a kaleidoscopic way. I think that's why when, doing this type of, to free people and to prevent this from happening to other people, I feel like that's my mission in the world. That's my place in the world. And that's how I make sense of what happened to me. So that is part of the deeper something that's going on. And it is healing. It's meaningful. It's cathartic. It makes my suffering count for something. It allows me to maintain my sanity even now when I think about the lost 16 years. But maybe the other aspect of it is I'm not angry. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I want to live a meaningful life, and I don't think I can do that if I'm angry or bitter. I think that I've lost so much already that if I was to be angry or bitter, I would in effect be losing the rest of my life. And if I was angry or bitter, it would not be like I'd be negatively impacting anybody else. So I take all of that. So I take the energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. And so that is my release. So I think all of those dynamics are in play right now in terms of the work that I do.
Yeah, yeah. And tell me something, the way you say that, I mean, it sounds like it's something from a book, like those quote unquote, I'm not angry. Otherwise, if I was angry, I wouldn't be able to enjoy my life. It sounds like a motivational book that you're quoting there. I mean, how did you're a human being, you go through these, 7 different emotions or stages in terms of accepting things, or, how did you actually really come to feel that realization of I can't be angry or I've got to let it go? Was that while you were still in prison, or was that now since you've left prison?
It was since I left prison. So while in prison, I did read a lot of self-help books and books about living a meaningful life. And that. So I think that the original thought got planted there. I mean, I hearken specifically back to the book by Viktor Frankl, Mankind's Search for Meaning. So I did read that book. And then 90 days before I was released, I remember being in, about 90 days, 30 to 90 days before I was released, I remember being in prison. I saw on television that another person, a New Yorker, had been exonerated, and in his press conference, they asked him, was he angry? And he said, no, he wasn't angry. And honestly, I thought that was like the silliest thing ever. And I thought, it seems far-fetched, but if I ever manage to be in his position, that's certainly not what I'm going to say. And that's not what I said when I turned out to be, in fact, I turned the question back around on the press when they asked me, are you angry? I recounted everything that I lost. And I said to them, well, if you lost all of that, would you be angry? So I was angry that first week, but then I felt like it was destroying me. And so I did some deeper thinking, which is, I learned to think deeply in prison. And I remembered back what I had saw from the interview I just referenced. And I guess somewhere in there that it mixed up into my thinking, maybe not on a conscious level, but just subconsciously, just what I read in Viktor Frankl's book. And so from there, I put everything together and I came up with those multiple lines of reasoning and, as to why I wasn't going to be angry. And look, I'm a deep thinker. And when I look at things from 4 or 5 different directions and it still holds up, it still points to the same conclusion, I generally conclude that I'm onto something, that's a correct viewpoint. And that was my process. Oh, that was my process.
And also oh, sorry, it broke up there. But also because you're a deep thinkers want a conclusion. They're busy with trying to find a resolve and a conclusion, right? So ultimately, if you are one of those deep thinkers, and I can imagine when you've experienced what you have of going into jail, wrongly convicted, being trapped, your freedom taken away from you, I can imagine that you learn almost the skill of coming to a resolve in this deep thinking process that's going to give you a good feeling rather than a bad feeling.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, that's very true. And plus, I'm not just a deep thinker, but I'm somebody I like to formulate a plan and they'll go out and execute it. But you can't have a plan. You can't go out and execute anything if you don't first come to a conclusion. You have to have a conclusion first, and then you set up a plan. But if you're going to stay there ambiguously, how can you move forward?
Yeah, and that's because you the conclusion is the belief. It's to come to a conclusion. It's to believe in whatever it is, that thing, and with that belief, you carry it forward. Right.
Right. Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about prison. Talk to me how it happened. What actually happened?
While I was in prison?
No, and even how did you end up with probably your hands behind your back in chains? Or, how did you end up being spotted from the crowd to say you did something wrong? You raped a girl or a boy or whatever it was.
Yeah, well, it was a murder and rape, and it was a girl, and it was a high school classmate actually that had been in a couple of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I mean, I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. So I got on the police radar because the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police that they might want to speak to me because I didn't quite fit in. I guess their underlying thinking was people that are loners and quiet and to themselves commit heinous crimes. I think that probably was their underlying thinking. So that was one way of how I got on the police radar. Another one was that I was a sensitive teenager, and this was really my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to it. And the police thought that since I barely knew this classmate, that was kind of suspicious. So that was a second factor. Although when looking at the bigger picture with that second factor, I mean, murders were very rare in Peekskill. Many people had an emotional reaction, and hence there being free mental health counseling set up all throughout the city of Peekskill to anyone who wanted it to help them process what had happened. A third thing is the police got a psychological profile, which purported to have the characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So you might say that was a reinforcing factor. So that was just how I got on their radar. Obviously, that's not how they arrested me, but that was how I came to be on their radar. And in terms of how they arrested me, so I met with the police about many times in the course of 6 weeks. And my interactions with the police always took on the dynamic that they would start out talking to me as a suspect, and then when they would push too hard and I would want to get away from them, they would switch it up. And Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was articulated by them. They would say things like, well, the kids won't talk freely around us, they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinions were correct. So that kind of tapped into what I mentioned earlier about wanting to be a police officer when I grew up. So that, along with my age, 16, was how they pulled the wool over my eyes on that. Eventually, they got me to agree to take and they also did the good cop, bad cop routine, and where one of the officers was pretending to be my friend. And so at some point, I began to look up to him as a father figure. So there's where my father never being involved in my life in any aspect came into play. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They told me, we have some new information and we want to share that with you, but you have to take and pass the polygraph first. And so I agreed to take the test. And so the next day, rather than report to school, I went to the police station for the test. I expected the test to be at the police station because I had heard through the rumor mill that other people had been polygraphed there. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother did not call around looking for me. They thought I was in school. So they drove me by car 40 minutes away from Peekskill in Westchester County. They drove me across county lines to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So that meant that I was not able to leave on my own anymore. I was dependent upon the police. There were 3 officers there from Peekskill, but then there was the polygraphist, Daniel Stevens, who was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, and he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as an officer. I never learned that he was law enforcement. He never read me my rights. I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat the time I was there. They gave me this brochure to read, but it had big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I figured, well, I'm here to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. From there, they put me in a small room, and he gave me countless cups of coffee in order to get me nervous. And then he attached me to the polygraph machine, and then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And each hour that passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test results that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And so that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off but could not do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he told me, just tell them what they want to hear. They can stop afterwards. They'll stop and you can go home afterwards, that you're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, I was only concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that nobody knew that I didn't know where I was, that nobody else knew where I was either, loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. So I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based upon the information which he had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the time everything was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, and I was crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. So that was how I came to be arrested. The other aspect of that after that was how I came to lose the trial.
Yeah. You mentioned 3 things before, but for them to sort of pinpoint you as an option. And one of them was that you reacted to the fear of, the death. You had an emotional reaction. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant is I meant that it was really a very sad thing. It wasn't that I was afraid of the dead like in the abstract. What I meant is that I thought that it was very sad that somebody 15 years old that used to go to classes, in the same high school that I did, that even went to a few of the classes that I was in, lost their life. I thought that death was just something that happened at the end of somebody's life. So that's what I mean. But in addition to that, I did get to go to the victim's house. Like after the internment, there was a general announcement that was made at the gravesite that anyone that wanted to go back to the family's house afterwards and spend a little time with the family had an invitation to go. And so I availed myself of that. And so when I went there was, coffee and pastries there. And so I went, and while I was there, I saw that they had left her room in the same exact way that it was when she was last there. And so that kind of struck me emotionally as well.
Yeah. And what was your actual reaction?
It was sad. I cried, but again, other people did as well. that was really my reaction. It was, I was emotional. That's all. I cried. Other people cried.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, that's not something to pinpoint you out. Do you know what I mean? That's not
Oh, I
something
do. I
to
do. I think that their whole. I agree. I think the whole police rationale was completely cockeyed and made no sense at all. It was kind of like Keystone Cops, but that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, also you spoke about the whole shy factor, and I've heard this before. I mean, also even with Jason Baldwin, these guys were sort of more, the typical, the outcasts of the class, wearing black and, not your normal sort of football players or basketball players or whatever you would call them. You know what I mean? They were more the outcast looking students. And you talk about, being shy and more reserved and more introverted. But I mean, it sounds, that's how many years ago is it now that it happened?
Well, that was 1990. So we're talking about, let's see, from then to 2021, we're talking about 31 years.
Yeah. And I mean, I mean, I guess in those days, because it feels like it was more recent, but I guess in those days they were a bit more narrow-minded with these sorts of personality profiling.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but I think I haven't heard that they don't use profiles anymore, and video in many states in the U.S. Interrogations still are not videotaped. There are some states that do mandate videotaping, such as New York, which I helped spearhead that change. They have exceptions for videotaping interrogations. So, and public defenders are still overwhelmed and overworked, and that still happens. And
Jeffrey, your videos, your internet has just gone down for a bit, so your video's off. Yeah, your camera was a bit vague. So, is your hair good?
yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so just to know, just to go back from where we ended. So basically what I was asking you, because you spoke about 3 factors, right, which sort of gave them the opportunity to point you out from other people. One of them being that you were sort of the outcast, you were shy, introverted. The other one was that your reaction to the situation was quite emotional. And you said something else. There were 3 things. What was the other thing that you said?
Yeah, the police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which claimed to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that.
Okay, and so how? Because I'm not a specialist in this topic, but like everyone listening right now, neither are they. So, what this a psychological profile. So I understand what that psychological profile, which means like you fitted this psychological profile, but did the family come to you and say this was the profile, or how did that information become a psychological profile? Did somebody see somebody or hear something, or
the Peekskill police, not being used to investigating murder cases, consulted with the New York Police Department, which deals with murder cases all the time, and they had somebody on staff there that that studied the crime, and they thought, well, this must have been done by somebody who was kind of a loner, was by himself, probably somebody that knew the victim, and likely even somebody in the high school.
Yeah. And can you just tell all of us who don't know the story?
I'm saying it's not a science. It's a junk science. It's not reliable, but it's, there's so-called experts that think that they could look at a crime and then have an idea of, what type of person is likely to have committed it. And so they list those things and then give that to the law enforcement entity that's actually investigating the crime. So when they come across people, they can compare it to that profile, and that might be a reason why they hone in on one person or another. that's how that works. But
Yeah.
it's not a
Yeah.
science. I mean, it was very inaccurate in my case, and in many others as well.
Yeah. So, and can you just tell us because your story is about this. So just tell us what happened. What happened? What was this woman's name? What happened actually?
Yeah, her name was Angela Correa, and she was so she was one of her classes was the photography class, and she was assigned to take pictures of foliage as the rest of the class was, and the teacher assigned male students to female students, and the male student assigned to her did not go to that assignment. So from school, she went to her house. She walked back to her house with her older sister. Her older sister went to the restroom, and when she came back out, Angela had left. She never had went out before on her own, but she decided this time to venture out on her own with her camera, and she went to the park to take pictures. And there's a wooded area that's in between this apartment condominiums and another school, and that was like a very wooded
Mhm.
area, and so that's where she went in order to take pictures. And while there,
Yeah.
she came across the actual perpetrator, who was high. He was a drug addict. He was high. He was in the area, and he attacked, raped, and murdered her.
Wow. So now this perpetrator has now been found. Was he still alive, being such a druggie and off the rails?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, he was found. I mean, when he was located, he was in prison also because he killed, left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later.
Wow.
So they took the DNA
So I
evidence.
mean, he was high and stuff. Sorry.
I was saying he was found because we took the DNA evidence that already didn't match me, and it was entered into the DNA data bank, and it matched it matched him, and his DNA was in the data bank because he had to give a sample because he had killed somebody, and he was in the prison
Yeah.
system. Confronted with that evidence, he admitted that he was the person who committed the crime.
And tell me, do you think they went through that same rigorous intimidation, interrogation with him as they did with you as well?
I don't think. Well, they questioned him. Yeah, I mean, he confessed to it, but I don't think that they coerced the false confession out of him. I mean, the DNA matched him, so really, it almost didn't matter. I
Okay.
mean, the gig was up.
Yeah. So tell me, how does that work now? Do they keep the person's body in a cold room, in a cold store facility? How do they match, or is it that they do a sample check of, I guess, within the woman's uterus, and then to see they keep whatever's that in a sample, and they can see there's DNA in that. They don't keep the body. How does this all work?
Yeah, well, like you said, they don't keep the body. They take samples. They take samples, and if seminal
Yeah.
fluid is detected, then they collect all the evidence, and then they preserve it.
Yeah. Okay. And so this can only be used how, just to understand this whole now DNA testing, because this has revolutionized, right? The world of, yeah. So I mean, for example, this woman was raped. So there was the ability to test, there was semen, so they could test that, they could store that. But what about people that are murdered, or how does that work then?
Yeah, so in terms of materials that could be tested, that would be semen, saliva, hair, blood, sweat. If there's a clothing item, then often the perpetrator has sweated into it. So you're right that most cases don't have. I mean, the most common cases that
Mhm.
have DNA in it would be rape cases and murder cases. I mean, it's much less likely in an
Mm.
arson case or a robbery or a burglary. So most of the DNA based exonerations are murder cases and rape cases. For the most part.
Mm. Mm. So now I mean, is it that nowadays, because there's this ability to do DNA testing, which there wasn't back when you went into jail. Is it that, and I understand in America things work so different from state to state, or has that changed as well? But you can answer that just now. But it's more, is it now that they have to have a DNA match before they can put someone in jail?
All right. So, firstly, they were doing DNA at the time that my trial happened. Okay. The DNA did not match me before the trial. What changed was that the DNA data bank was created. And so, what the difference between the two things is that meant that before they could only compare DNA that's found at a crime scene, they could only compare that to a particular suspect. And the database was created. You could take the DNA that was at the crime scene, you could compare it to all the samples that were in the database. So basically, we were able to go from saying it wasn't me to who it actually did match. So that being said, though, in terms of your question of whether they have to match the DNA before they make an arrest, no, they don't. They do not. And DNA is only in 5 to 12% of all serious felony cases. So in most cases, there is no DNA to test. But they don't have to. Even if there is DNA to test, they're not mandated to do the testing prior to making arrest. They just have to find enough evidence that to have what's called it's called probable cause, right? But it just means there's a reason to believe that somebody committed a crime.
Wow. So you were going to say earlier that that was the initial screening, right? Which got you on the floor, like in a fetus position, completely broken. And then you said that then there was the trial. So tell us about that section.
Yeah. So the DNA before the trial, the DNA didn't match me, as I mentioned to you, and the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, and basically he claimed that the victim was promiscuous, and that was what allowed the prosecutor to argue. Well, that was how the seminal fluid didn't match me, but that I was still guilty. That she was sleeping with everybody, and that she must have slept with someone else prior to me, my raping and murdering her. And then he mentioned it. He mentioned a specific person that he said must have been the one who slept with her, but he never had a DNA sample taken from that person. He never called him as a witness. He just made an unsupported argument to the jury. He got away with that because the victim's family was not coming to court. They had no idea of what was being said about her in court. And then my attorney, who was a public defender, basically didn't defend me. No, he never explained to the jury what the DNA not matching me meant. He never used that to challenge the confession. He never tried to discredit this medical examiner. He would not allow me to testify because when they interrogated me, it was not videotaped. There was no audio tape. There's no signed confession. It's just the cop's word for it. And they left the threat and false promise out of their testimony. Then he wouldn't allow me to testify at the trial. And so when you added all these things up, I was wrongfully convicted and I was given a 15 to life sentence.
Wow. What is it in their interest to, like you said, he was manipulating it, he was lying. Why would he do that?
Because it's illegal what he did. The police are not allowed to threaten somebody.
Why would he do it?
Because he wanted to. Because they wanted the perception that the case was solved. There was a lot of public pressure on the police to make an arrest. And so they wanted anybody, and I happened to be who they picked for the reasons that I mentioned to you.
So there's a pressure on these cops to persecutors, cops. There's a pressure on the whole system to conclude a trial, a murder trial, rape trial. There's a pressure on them to do it. So then they're also pressured to find a victim.
Well, they're pressured to find a suspect and to arrest them. Yes,
I mean, not a victim, sorry, a suspect, Joe. Yeah.
yes.
So what? Yeah, that I mean, yeah, you are. Was your mom there and your grand there when this happened in the trial?
Well, my grandmother was not. My mother was. Yeah, my grandmother was not coming to court. My mother was going to court, and my aunt was as well. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, what happened on that day? That must have been like. Would you describe that as like one of the worst days of your life, or is that not the
Absolutely. Yeah,
day?
of course. Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, I was found guilty of a crime that I was, innocent of. And, it's hard to imagine something more difficult than that. I mean, what? I mean, being told that you're terminally ill or being in some horrific accident and now you're in a wheelchair or you've got cancer or AIDS. But I mean, other than something like that, I can't think of anything that would be worse than that.
Mm.
But nobody saw that coming. I mean, I certainly expected to be found not guilty. I mean, I still believed in the court system, and I thought only guilty people were found guilty. But I learned that that was not the case.
Have you seen any of those guys again? Any of those men or women who I don't know who they were? Those prosecutors. Have you seen them again?
So I've seen all of them because when I was later proven innocent through the further DNA testing, I did I did file a lawsuit, and when it was their turn to come and testify in the deposition, I attended. I wanted to be there when that happened, and so I sat right across from them. Was listening to them
What
as
was
my
it like?
lawyers were questioning them. Yeah,
Mm. What was that like?
it was very difficult emotionally. I mean, you're not supposed to speak to people, but when the detective came in the room that was pretending to be my friend, the one who had played the role of pretending to be my friend, like he
Mm.
nodded to me, like we were like friends from way back when, and I kind of broke the decorum, and I just remember screaming out, "Yo, you cost me 16 years of my life," and his answer was, "I didn't cost you anything."
Wow. So what's happened to those guys now?
The short answer is nothing. Um, they never got in trouble. They never got in trouble for that, and they never faced any criminal charges. And while I won the lawsuit, I mean, they didn't personally pay any money. I mean, just the municipality paid money that they worked for. So everybody, nobody got in trouble for anything. That's one of the
Mm.
things. That's one of the.
And did they? Yeah.
I was going to say that was one of that's still one of the things that frustrates me in a way. They really were never, they never were held accountable for that.
Mm. And I mean, would you want them to be accountable? I mean, you mentioned money now, which raises other ideas in my head of things that I'm interested to ask you. But when you say accountable, what would sort of give you peace in the situation? Is it that you get paid out, or is that they would come to you personally and say, "Listen, I screwed up, or I had bad judgment, or I'm sorry, I was in a position X, Y, and Z to do this," or what is it that you want from those guys?
I would like them to be arrested and have to do heavy time in prison for what they did. I mean, I did 16 years from what they did. Why should they have to do anything less? So I would want that. And I would want them to apologize to me personally as well. Don't make any excuses. You did what you did.
Mm.
We both know what you did. The DNA proved what you did. I'd like an apology as well. I think they should do, some significant prison time and also apologize to me. But I know that that's never going to
Mm.
happen.
So earlier we started the conversation talking about anger, right? And that you felt that you've got you've come to a piece. You read Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's Search for Meaning. When you say this, it sounds to me like there's still, and I mean, I can imagine why.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, I agree. Maybe there's still something there a little bit on that aspect of it. Sure, I agree. You're right.
Yeah. So talk to me about prison. What was prison like? I mean, talk to me about, like, first, actually, what I want to know is on that day when the hearing was called. I mean, what actually, just paint the picture for me, because you see this in movies all the time. Where there's a whole scene and then someone gets convicted. The hammer goes down and the guy gets taken to the back. Like, what was it like for you? Like, tell me, show me in my head.
When I was found guilty or when I was released?
Yeah. On the day you were found guilty.
Yeah. So the jury sent a note out to the judge saying that they reached a verdict, and the court mentioned that openly, that the jury's reached a verdict, and we had to wait for a half hour for everybody to get there. Well, I was there, my attorney was there, but the prosecutor was called and had to come to the courtroom. And I think that they made an alert to the media as well, because the media had been covering the case. And maybe a half hour later, the jury came back in, and in the room. They were in the room where they were deliberating, and I remember I was sitting at the table and I was making eye contact with them, and I was looking at them as they were walking in. Because there was a saying I had heard at the jail, at the county jail, but back before I had gotten bailed out, and that's if the jury makes eye contact with you and they smile at you, that means that they've found you not guilty. But if they look away from you or they look serious, then they've found you guilty. So I'm looking at them and they're not making eye contact with me. They're looking kind of serious, and I remembered that. But then I thought, well, I guess maybe they don't know what they're talking about, because maybe that saying is not true, because I'm still thinking I'm going to be found not guilty. So the jury walks in, they sit down, and the court clerk stands up, and he asked the jury if they've reached a verdict, and the jury foreperson stood up and said yes, and they started reading off charges one at a time. And so the first three charges I was found not guilty of, and then they read off another charge, and I heard the word guilty, and then they read another charge, and they said the word guilty, and they read another charge, and they said the word guilty. And I remember that. I really couldn't believe my hearing, and I remember questioning my own hearing. Well, wait, did I just hear that right? Did I miss the word "not" in there? So yeah, so I remember hearing that, and then my attorney asked the court to, they call it, they asked each individual juror if that was their verdict, and so all 12 people had to confirm that was their decision. And then the jury was excused, and I was the court officers came and they took me back into the holding cell area, and I was in custody.
And were you too shocked to even say anything?
Yes. Yeah, I was. I was shocked. I was in shock. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what was going to happen to me anymore at that point.
Sure. And you were 17 by this stage, right?
I was. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. It's a crazy, it's such a crazy position to be in. I often wonder, like, we would talk, I was talking about the worst day of your life, or well, you were referring to someone has an accident and then, get told they're paralyzed and they can't walk again. And I question the situation when in terms of freedom, right? So now you get told basically your freedom's gone. You're going to be in the control of somebody else. Your freedom's taken away from you, and you have no more decision over your own life. And you're only 17 years old, and then you get locked up in this jail, and then like how did that play out for you in your head psychologically? How did you not go into psychosis or lose the plot?
In a way, I did. I mean, I did. I mean, I was I became really, really depressed, and I felt suicidal. So in a way, I did. I mean, I don't think it was psychosis, but it was those other aspects of it. It's kind of in the same spirit of what you're asking me.
Hmm. So how did you cope?
Well, ultimately, I mean, I just started believing, and then I started looking forward to the next legal proceeding where I hoped that everything was going to be straightened out. So after I was found guilty, the next thing I was looking at was the sentencing hearing, because I wanted my attorney to try to get the guilty verdict thrown out at the sentencing hearing prior to the sentence being given. And then when that didn't work out, I was sent to prison shortly after that, and the next thing was I was looking forward to the next appeal, which I was sure I was going to win
Mm.
because I was innocent, and so I just felt like I just have to hold on, for this next year or two until the appeal is decided. I mean, it wound up taking, close to 4 years before I got a decision, and then when I lost, I looked forward to the next proceeding, and I just kept repeating the same process. I mean, and that took me through
Mm.
11 years doing that. And then once the appeals were all over, the only way back into court is if you find some new evidence. And so, because I didn't have money to hire an attorney or an investigator to try to investigate and find new evidence, I started writing letters to anyone that could help me, either directly or indirectly. So whether you were in the legal field or not, if there was some action within their ability, if there was some action I could envision somebody taking that could set in motion a chain of events that ultimately culminated into my obtaining the legal investigative help that I needed, I wrote the letter. And so that became the next thing that I was holding on to. So I did that for 4 years. And then by that point, I had close to 15 years in. And so I began looking at the parole board as that was the next thing I held on to. And, but then I went to the parole board, and because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse or taking responsibility, I was turned down for parole, and they told me to appear in front of them 2 years later. And at that point, I thought it was over, because I knew a lot of people that would go to the parole board and be turned down, and would go back to the parole board in 2 years and be turned down now, and have that same pattern recurring over and over again. But I wound up getting legal representation. One of the letters that I wrote ended up in the hands of Claudia Whitman, who's an investigator, and she believed in my innocence based on the DNA. And she ultimately connected me to the Innocence Project. She got them to take my case, and then I got then when they getting their representation was the first key, and then after that, the district attorney who had Janine Pirro, who had blocked me from getting further DNA testing and who had fought all 7 of my appeals, she left office, and her successor allowed me to have the testing. And then the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank, so that it matched him. And so that's how the conviction was overturned September 22nd, 2006, and the charges were dismissed November 2nd, 2006, on actual innocence grounds. And at some point shortly after that, the actual perpetrator was arrested, and you know, ultimately he pled guilty and was sentenced for the crime.
Yeah. So what, because what I'm hearing, what got you through it was that, you just held on to that image of hope every time, you said, okay, it was first, okay, the letters, and then, well, your appeal, and then that didn't happen, but it was then the letter after the letter. And, you kept holding on and coming up with also these ideas, right? To hold on to, that this could be an option, that could be an option. I mean, that is a human survival skill. I think that that's what gets people through life, right? Is that constant ability to, you know, to follow the breadcrumbs of hope. And you were able to do that. Whether it's survival in prison or just survival in life, it's a life skill. What do you think gave you the ability to do that, where maybe other prisoners wrongly convicted don't have that ability to follow the breadcrumbs?
When you put it like that, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess just my fighting spirit. I mean, just, just not giving up, not being willing to, like you said, let go of that, just I wasn't willing to let go of those breadcrumbs of hope, because if you let go of that, what else do you have? But I want to point out that while what we've just said is the bottom line, I just would like to add a little bit more color to that. I mean, so another aspect or mixed in with that,
Mm.
definitely belief in God was one thing. Another thing was that I used to go to the law library and learn the law, and that helped me. That felt like empowering. I used to read articles about other
Mhm.
people who were in the same position I was that had been exonerated, and that gave me inspiration to keep going. Another aspect of it was
Mhm.
there was another prisoner there named Frank Sterling, who was also wrongfully imprisoned. And Frank and I used to get together once every 6 weeks, and we would try to keep each other going morale wise, and we would brainstorm about what the next move was to make. Frank was ultimately exonerated by DNA a couple of years after me, doing 18 years. So we actually were two wrongfully convicted prisoners that were aware that we both believed in each other's innocence. And normally that doesn't happen in prison. I mean, if there's people that are wrongfully imprisoned, they're not aware of each other's innocence. It's just like a couple of ships passing in the night. But that was another aspect of it. Another thing was I found other ways to hold on. So I should have cut out pictures of nature scenes, and I would hang them up in the cell, and I would just travel there mentally. And used to listen to sports talk radio, but it was not listening to sports talk radio. This was like a lifeline to the outside. And I created
Mhm.
this elaborate delusion for myself when I would play basketball or chess or ping pong, and I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so was everybody else. But it was not like kids fooling around on a playground. This was the internal defense mechanism. I needed to get out of the prison mentally, so I created that space for myself within my head. And similarly, in 1998, the prison where I spent most of the time at Elmira Correctional Facility, they allowed us to purchase televisions. So while my TV stayed off for the most part because I was doing legal work, I was writing letters, I was reading I was reading like 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week. So mostly my TV stayed off. But when it was turned on, there were certain weekly programs that I used to watch, and I again engaged in a delusion. So when I would watch those programs, I would pretend like if I was visiting with friends. So that was, and then you use euphemisms. It's not the prison warden; it's the superintendent. It's not the guards; it's the correction officers. And it's not that I'm going to this prison assignment in the morning and this prison assignment in the afternoon. I'm going to school, or I'm going to work. So usage of euphemisms
Mm.
as well. So I would say that all of those things were factors, along with the idea that I knew that nobody was coming to my rescue, that no one that I knew already was coming to my rescue, so that I was going to have to go out and recruit somebody that could be that champion for me, that could build that bridge between me and the necessary legal professionals that I needed. And I had read about that in other wrongful conviction cases that ended with
Mm,
somebody being exonerated. I had read that that had happened. So,
mm,
so I didn't have the luxury of losing my mind. That was yet another act of self-preservation. If I had lost my mind or allowed myself to go into a depression, then I was not going to be equipped to simultaneously reach out to people and try to get their help. And but not only did the letter writing campaign ultimately culminate into my getting that champion, which did lead to my getting the legal help, but another facet of that was in the last couple of years, one of the ads that I placed looking for a pen pal was responded to by somebody who had been a crime victim. His name was Scott Kiley. And in my ad looking for a pen pal, I referenced that I was innocent and that the DNA didn't match me. And he answered my ad. And so we corresponded for the last 2 years. So I feel like he kind of showed up in the nick of time because I was really at the end of my rope. I mean, I was openly asking this stranger
mm.
that I didn't know from anywhere, should I just give up? Should I quit? Should I just go ahead and commit suicide and be done? I'm never going to get out of here, and he helped keep me going.
Yeah. And tell me, just from a practical point of view, how do you get a pen pal in prison? How does that work?
Well, there's a number of options. I mean, what worked for me was I placed the ad in a newspaper. You just place an ad in a newspaper and you take a chance. But I mean, there's other ways of doing
And
it.
you can do that from prison?
Yeah, you can correspond with a newspaper or any person that's doing business, and you can pay for the ad. I mean, there's a way to send money out from your prison account, and so I did that. But
Okay.
generally, there's other ways to do that. I mean, there's internet sites that are specifically for prisoners that are looking for a pen pal. A prisoner could uh, pay the fee that it costs, or somebody on the outside or friend or family member could do that. People do that, and sometimes prisoners meet someone on the outside that's connected some kind of way to another prisoner. Maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's someone that they know at a distance. I mean, there's all different. You're only really limited
Mm.
by your imagination.
So it's interesting what you said earlier. You said I didn't have the luxury of losing my mind.
Right. Yeah, so many times
I
I
find
didn't
that
many
fascinating.
so many times I wanted to. I didn't feel like going through the prison routine. I don't feel like getting up 6:30 in the morning so the guards can come around and make sure I'm standing there, that I'm awake, that I'm still breathing, that I haven't escaped. I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like leaving my cell and going to the cafeteria and doing all the protocols there and getting this. They give you the spoon, and you have to, when you leave, you have to give them back the spoon, and someone's counting it. You have to go through the metal detector and go to whatever your assignment is. I didn't feel like going through all of that. Sometimes I felt like just laying there in the bed and just refuse to participate in any of it. Just lay there silent and don't answer anybody. Don't do anything. Just sit there and just in one big protest. I felt that
Mm.
thought, and other times I didn't feel like I had the energy to keep going through everything. I mean, it's not an easy thing to be in prison. I mean, it's not simply the loss of your freedom. It's that I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. Every time I lost an appeal, that was like I was wrongfully convicted yet again, because you can't have an appeal and work at it and pray without hoping. But then when your hopes are dashed, that's really a devastating blow as well. The prison itself it's very violent there. There was, stabbings and cuttings all the time. There was other violence that didn't involve weapons. The guards were verbally abusive, so you have to navigate that. You have to, like I had everybody mapped out. Like when certain guards were working and they were in the area where I was at, my only goal for that day was simply to avoid detection. And just like you have to, I used to study the prisoners as well, and people that I thought that had this
Mm.
metaphorical cloud above their head, that they were going to self-destruct. They're like this big thunderhead, and the only goal is to make sure they don't manage to take me down with them. When they eventually self-destruct. I don't want to be caught in that. And so you have to navigate that, and you have to learn all these prison survival tactics and things that you can do to minimize the chances that you're going to be involved into a violent incident. And then you're trying not to run afoul of any of these prison rules, because if you don't, then it's going to be that much more that I have to answer when I go to the parole board, where they're considering whether they're going to release me or not. It's not just dealing with the charges, but then, well, what happened these times you got in trouble while you were there? So it was this big nonstop gauntlet, for 16 years. So that's part of what I mean. I got tired of dealing with all of that at times, but you don't have a choice. You have to keep going. Just remember, if I stop participating, then I'm going to be in trouble. That means I'm not going to be allowed to go to the law library. That means I'm not going to be able to use the phone. That means I'm not going to be earning the pennies that they're giving us, which means I'm not going to have any money to purchase stamps, which means I'm not going to then be able to send letters out. It means that even the limited information you have in the prison to get addresses and other people, I'm not going to be able to move around to go and get that. So everything falls apart if I stop participating in the whole prison process. So that was all part of it. And plus, I mean, how do you write a letter for looking for help and you're suicidal, or you're just completely out of it? How can you do both at the same time? I submit you can't. And so that's all part of what I mean when I said that. I didn't have the luxury of losing my mind. It was quite a bit went into that.
No, I find your life experience fascinating also in sort of correlation to people who aren't in prison, right? And I guess I think this, being the analyst that I am as well, and always looking for the inspiring essence in conversations, no matter what anybody has gone through, and what I find fascinating about your story is how it's so also linked to people who aren't in prison, but are in their own prison within themselves, and how they can, really they can learn so much from what you've just been saying, in terms of, you talk about you didn't have the luxury, and this is the thing, depression and I don't want to use that loosely. I don't want to get into trouble here where I say, label people with depression. But I think that when one allows themselves to get into depression and to get into, and I'm talking about from the beginning of it, I think there's a lot of space where people do have that decision, to go down that road or not. And the thing is, because you had it mapped out, like you knew, if I don't behave myself or if I don't make money, I'm not going to get stamps. I'm not going to be able to, to pay, to send letters. And you knew what your survival meant. And in a way that's such, this is going to sound weird, but it's a better advantage point from people who are not in jail, but are going through this horrible spiral of depression in life, because they're not seeing their life as this sort of map of having to survive. They're not seeing all the ways that they're going to need to be alert so that they can send letters, so that they can access the library. So, it's interesting how seeing the keys, the different keys to the different locks, the different doors, knowing those gave you so much strength to figure your life out, to get out of prison, to own your life, that people otherwise, in who aren't in jail, but who are trapped in their own minds, don't have that advantage point in a way. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying. And I think that the themes that I've kind of summed up everything like into a formula, in my own mind that I can articulate. And all that is drawn from my life journey that we've talked about now, and in navigating that difficult first 5 years of freedom when I had to readjust, and, technology is different. I have psychological after effects, social stigma, all of that, and then even in trying to get into law school and trying to pass classes there, and and the hell that is preparing for the bar exam. And so from all of those checkpoints in my journey, let's say, my formula I found is this: is that set a goal, which for me, was overcoming some kind of adversity. I mean, mine was specifically that, but we're going to keep it generic, like you said. So set a goal, have a realistic plan. You should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, yeah, I could see how that might work. Remember, be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal, the plan is not the goal. So if an unexpected door opens for you that brings you closer to that door, then just because you didn't plan for that doesn't mean you shouldn't walk through it and keep advancing forward. No excuses. So there might be a reason why something is hard for you to do, but no excuses as to why it can't be done. Work really, really hard. So I think that people that work hard are people that are likely to overcome their adversity. It's not just going to just drop into their lap just because. And never give up. And whenever I reached a juncture where I couldn't go on anymore in any one of those phases of my life, I said to myself, well, maybe this is the key moment. Maybe I was on the verge of a breakthrough, but because I quit, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't go on anymore, I'm going to do it anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And then once you make it through, you have to reach back and help somebody else that's in the same position that you're in do some work on the preventative side. And if you can do that, that's how you not only have overcome your adversity, but you can rebuild your life into something that's meaningful, that's difference making. It'll be healing. It'll be cathartic. You make your suffering count for something, and it'll help improve the world some. And I know that universal message can apply to, say, someone that's been faced discrimination, or someone that's faced racism, another person that was a victim of domestic violence, somebody that's been sexually abused or sex trafficked, or somebody that's been homeless, or somebody that's faced some sort of debilitating illness, whatever it might be. I know that generic form,
and even not so harsh, even not
right?
so
Even
harsh
much
a
things,
situation.
much.
you know, because often, depressions and mental illness doesn't happen from such harsh situations. They happen from more subtle, almost life acceptable situations, like parents divorcing, or being an outcast at school, or something more subtle than these harsh dynamics that you have referred to. um um I was curious earlier when you were talking about, obviously we were talking about following the breadcrumbs, and, when in jail, and seeing those lights of hope. Do you think that, so there are 2 questions in this. Do you think that when you're innocent, it's like there's almost those tricks where, if you think about something that's true, and you push your arm down, your hand, you've got more strength. But if you think about something that's not true and someone pushes your hand down, you don't have as much strength. I don't know if you know that trick.
No, I'm not familiar with it, but I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Do you think that strength applies to people in prison? The people that are innocent have more strength to make it through, and the ones that are guilty and have committed, serious crimes, don't have that strength? Like, is there something there in that?
Yeah, yes, I would say that there is definitely. But the other dynamic in play that's true at the same time is that I spoke to prisoners that were guilty, and they said to me, look, I did what I did. I got caught. This is my punishment. So I'm not going to cry about it. I'm just going to make the best of it that I can and try to go home as quickly as I can. So they were able to get to
Mm.
this area of resignation, of acceptance. And whereas I could never get there because I knew that I was innocent and that I did not belong there. And I didn't have any idea of how long everything was going to last for. So, in that aspect of it,
Mm.
the experience of doing time for someone who's innocent is a much different dynamic than to doing time for something that you're guilty of.
Or what I question is, because so inspirational interviews and really what my drive is, right, is about connecting people with truth through the stories of people who are connecting with their truth. And what I think with what we're discussing right now is it not that it's all about truth. So while someone did something wrong and they pleaded guilty, or they admitted to their guilt, there's truth in that. So there's strength in their journey then, because they say, they put their hands up and they say, I was wrong, or maybe they don't admit it yet in that I was wrong, I'm sorry, but they do say I was wrong. So there's truth in that. So that gives a certain strength, because human beings do mess up in life, right? And whether it's a crime from killing someone or a crime from stealing something, human beings are human. And thankfully, not everyone, most people don't perform such terrible things in life. But it's when you say, I was wrong, I did wrong, it gives a certain strength then to those people, like you were saying with this guy. Look, I was wrong. And, there's an acceptance because they own their truth in it. And the same with you. You had your truth to get through it, or your strength to get through it, because you knew your truth. Even though you were called guilty, it wasn't your truth. And so it's the conviction of truth that gets people through, such crazy times of their life.
I would agree with that. And I would also add that for people that are doing time that are guilty, I mean, their breadcrumbs of hope is that they're hoping to get paroled when their first parole board appearance. They're hoping to make it. So they're doing things.
Mm.
This is the people that are committed to trying to get out or rehabilitate themselves. They're doing things that make it in their mind that will increase the chances that they'll be paroled the first time that they make their
Mm.
appearance at the parole board, rather than being told no. So that's their breadcrumbs
Yeah.
of truth, and
Yeah.
maybe along the way their accomplishments. I mean, as they complete various vocational trades or therapeutic programs, and as they
Yeah.
maneuver their way out of trouble. I mean, that's for people that go that route. Not everybody in prison does that either. There's some people that just, in my opinion, they waste their time. They don't bother going to school. They don't learn vocational trades. They just they're work jobs like just being, if you want to waste your time, if you want to work in the laundry, if you want to be a janitor and just sweep and mop the floor, if you want to just go to recreation all day rather than go someplace to learn, if you don't want to take some program that claims to be rehabilitative, that addresses the crime that you're there, if you don't want to bother to take that, because the parole board is going to want to see that you took some kind of program that addresses the root cause of why you're there. uh, you know, you can go that route. There's people that do that, and that get into trouble all the time, and that are in gangs or in violence. If you want to go the negative route, there's more than a few examples of that. But there's a good segment of the
Mm.
prison population that doesn't do that. That they are following the breadcrumbs of truth, and they do truth, and they do have of hope, and they are following their truth. And some people are looking forward to difference making crime-free lives once they're released. And I've seen people do that,
Mm,
where once they're released, they're working in as drug counselors, helping with we're working with people that have drug addiction, or they're working to divert at-risk youth from ending up in prison, or they're working as teachers, or they're working in
mm,
prisoner reentry, and some people work with homeless populations. So, and some people don't engage in a difference making life per se, but they're just determined that they're never going back. They want to retain their freedom and live a normal life in a normal environment, and spend some time with their family. So I've seen a lot of people that way,
mm.
just like I've seen more than my share of people while I was incarcerated for 16 years. I've seen more than my share of people end up going back to prison as well.
Yeah. So tell me, I know you said earlier that, you thought that you'd one day want to become a cop, before you were convicted. Um, what do you think? Like, I'm just curious, what do you think you would have ended up doing had you not gone to jail?
I think I would have become a lawyer, because my thought of what I wanted to be when I grew up, before I was a teenager, was to be a cop. But then as a teenager,
Mm,
that changed. I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer because, as I mentioned, my mother had a personal injury attorney. So I
mm,
think that had I not gone to prison, that I would have become an attorney, and I probably would have done personal
mm.
injury law.
Personal injury law. Yeah. So, what is your idea about, you said earlier about the stages, right? And one of the things you said was, once you get through, then it's good to, put an arm back and help the other person who's in the same situation that you were in. Um, what do you think about the idea of, you carry on doing what you're doing now, which is, standing up for the rights of people who are wrongly convicted and helping those people be freed of that situation? Um, do you think if you stay doing that, it's going to keep you in this story, or or do you see yourself doing this for a certain period of time and then branching into personal injury law maybe later? Or is this now something you feel that you're committed to for the rest of your life?
Definitely, it's something that I'm committed to for the rest of my life. This is my calling. This is my purpose in the world. So I'm always going to be doing this in one form or another. What I mean by that is,
And what do you mean by one form or another?
what I mean is that right now I'm doing it from the nonprofit sector, or what, like in UK, might be referred to as NGOs. I'm doing it that way.
Mm,
But at some point, I might decide to make the jump to politics. And so I go from private sector to public sector. Maybe I might run for office and work to free people, from and do policy changes from that position rather than from the nonprofit. So I can go from trying to persuade people to do the right thing to actually having my hands on a
mm,
few of the levers of power and to be able to do things myself.
yeah. And how do you think it affects you staying psychologically in the story of your past, or does it actually free you from the story of your past?
It's part of my identity. I mean, I consider that I think of myself as an advocate, as an attorney, and my motivation, I mean, the same that someone else would be. I have a body of work that I would put up against anybody's, and I hold myself to that same standard. It's just that my motivation is
Mm,
different from theirs. I mean, my motivation is that I was wrongfully convicted, and that's what fuels me. That motivates me. But I'm much more than just an exoneree. I'm an attorney, and I'm an advocate, and so I look at myself that
mm,
way. And so it does allow me to continue to, if you understand who you are, you can walk, you can live in that way. And I have a sense of inner peace that way because I'm fulfilling my life purpose. If I was to stop doing this,
mm,
I know that it would feel empty to me because on the rare times that I have gone on vacation, by the time I'm in day five, or in day seven, I start to feel empty, and I feel like there's no real meaning in what I'm doing, and then I'm thinking about all the important things that I have to do that are consistent with that are related in one way or another to the mission that I'm
Mm.
doing. So yeah, so I mean,
Well, I
I
think
just
that that's really, I think it's really beautiful because it's, hearing what you just said now, it's also so much about accepting, your life in its entirety and owning it. And by doing, it's like you said, when you go on holiday, you feel like you want to get back hands on, you want to get doing the things that you want to be who you are. And in a way, like people use this sort of idea of holiday of escaping who they are or escaping their life, but actually you're living it in its entirety now, you owning it, which is beautiful because it is a full acceptance. And obviously I do think about the cops and the guys that convicted you wrongly that you are still angry with, which I can totally understand. But obviously, you don't want that part to ever hold you back. But I guess in a way, it also fuels you still on your journey, that there is still that emotional energy there that you hold.
right, but I want to share that, for the most part, I want to say 99, really close to 100% of the time, I'm not thinking about them though. I'm not bringing them into my
Mm,
mind. I just kind of went there because you asked me the question, well, what would I want to see happen to them? So when that happens, yeah, it comes to the front of my mind. But other than that, I'm not thinking about them anymore.
mm,
I'm just thinking about, the world and what the world needs from me. And, why am I here in the world? And my carrying out, my purpose. That's really what
yeah.
and I'm thinking about, the people that need my help, and the preventative work that I'm doing. That's what I'm thinking about.
Mm,
If I was to stop and think about them all the
yeah.
time, then I would be angry. Then what I said not being angry wouldn't be true anymore then. And I would be back to,
Mm,
basically losing the rest of my life. And I'm not going to do that.
yeah. So tell me, what do you think? So you were always going to be a lawyer, right? You said that now earlier again. You confirmed that. Maybe it would have been personal injury law, but you you
Right. Or
you
maybe even criminal
you have
law,
always
but
been a lawyer.
yeah, maybe even criminal law, but doing trials, not like trying to free wrongfully convicted people. Because I think that
Yeah.
even had I been found not guilty, maybe I would have, maybe I probably would have done, if I had still been arrested. So that was my answer, if I hadn't been arrested. But if I had been arrested, but the trial ended differently, the trial ended like I was found not guilty, I think I would have done criminal law. But it would have just been to defend people falsely accused, like at a trial. It wouldn't be, I
Mm.
wouldn't, I still might, even then, I still might not have even known that the whole world of wrongful conviction existed.
So my question in that is, what do you think being in jail? What strength did going to jail give you that otherwise you wouldn't have had now? Other than forget about the experience now of why you went because it was wrongly convicted and the whole DNA, but what what life skills or real intricate strengths did being in jail give you to fulfill you doing the best job ever now, had you not gone to jail? Because you ultimately would have always become a lawyer, right? So, what did it give you that you otherwise wouldn't have?
I think energy and drive, and just the idea of, set a goal and just don't give up. I think that those are clear cut things. But then I feel like I learned so much while I was in prison. Just, I mean, honestly, not that I say this very often, but I really learned more reading 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week from 1998 to 2006. I learned far more that way than what I did going to grad school, getting getting a master's degree in criminal justice, or going to law school and becoming an attorney. I learned more the one way than I did the other. So I think that that's a clear cut takeaway. While I was in prison, I took a course on how adults learn in order to then work as a teacher's aide. So the principles of that, of how adults learn, I use that in my own life now when I'm trying to learn something for me. I I learned to type while I was in prison. This we're in the information age. Everything's based around the computer. If you're able to type,
Mm.
you can that's much easier than looking down at the keyboard or doing the Fred Flintstone one finger at a time. I can just put my hands in the home row
Yeah.
key and just start going. I don't have to look. I even know most of the time if I've made a mistake. So those are all things that I got from being in prison, and the idea of short-term sacrifice for long-term gain is something that I got from prison.
Mm. So do you within yourself, do you recognize gratitude for that?
Yes, I do. I do, but I reconcile all of that as that's what I sought after. That's what I found. It wasn't that the prison offered that to me. It's that I decided to get that out of it. I mean, and there's a big difference
Mm.
in that.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Interesting
I
that
think that
point.
it's important. No matter,
And actually,
can I just say one thing? I think it's important in whatever
mm,
challenge or life circumstance you find yourself in, trying to use your time productively and not let it just have such a dominating effect on your life to the point that it shuts other things down.
mm.
Don't compound losses. Don't
I
compound
find
loss
the
on top of
story.
loss.
Say that again, sorry.
I said, don't don't compound your loss. Don't throw loss on top of loss on
Mm.
top of loss.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You should definitely, I don't know if you have or, but you should definitely, it's just such, your story is just such a beautiful, uh, m- not metaphor, but it's just a beautiful mirror, to people who are in a jail in their own heads. It's such a beautiful story, to also not just help people um, who are wrongly convicted, but help people who are in the jails of their own mind. You know.
Absolutely, sure, absolutely. And I want to mention as well that on the advocacy side, I have used the public platform I have to also bring attention to other non-innocence issues, like prison reform, college education for prisoners, solitary confinement, uh, compassionate release, elderly people in prison, reform the parole process. So I have spoken about those issues, and so in that way, I like to think that I've done something for the prisoners who are there rightfully as well. In because there
Yeah.
were a lot of disturbing things that I saw and experienced while I was there that are not related to innocence, but that I think are just totally inconsistent with a civilized society having a justice system or prison system.
Mm. Wow. So, what are your other than work? What is your hope going forward? Or can you separate the two?
It's really hard to separate the two. I would say my hopes would be that I hope to continue to I want to make my public profile much bigger than what it is. I would like to be able to break into the motivational speaking field. I have done some presentations internationally, like I did a week long tour in Argentina and Armenia, and one time I went to Canada. But I would like to be on the international speaking circuit more and be able to meet with some of the elected officials in other countries, like I did in those countries that I mentioned. I would like to have my book published. I'd love to have a movie out there. I would like to be able to attract the type of support for by a nonprofit organization that would allow me to have a chapter of the organization in each state in the US and ultimately in each country, because I really see this as a worldwide problem, not an American problem. And I think that countries where we don't hear about wrongful conviction is because very few people are being exonerated. Nobody is doing this type of work. So I do see it as a
Mm.
worldwide issue. So those are those are my hopes. But that would all be, as public support allows that to happen. And I hope that things could improve politically as well. I mean, I would like to, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years down the line, I really would like to make the jump to politics, but it would have to
Mm.
be that things were much less divisive. I mean, I would be doing that really to be a servant of the people and to advance the cause. I don't want half of the people hating me because I had, I mean, to get elected, you really have to be, you have to run on a party label, but I don't want the people in the other party all to hate me because it's run a different. I don't care about any of that. I don't care about, I'm not a partisan. I could care less which party is in power.
Mm.
It's just a means to an end. But and I wouldn't want to do it when half the people are going to hate me because I'm on a different party label than the other. I'm really just an independent, and I believe in voting conscience and not dictates of other people, and that
Mm.
really is not where the U.S. is at politically now, and it's such a polarized country,
Yeah.
and we've almost lost our freedom of speech because you're free to speak, but if people don't like your opinion, there's no more debates anymore, or discussing merits of issues back and forth. And then once we're done, we're done. The conversation's finished. But people personalize everything now,
Mm.
and there's like a type of thought police. And if you have this opinion or that opinion, people hate you, and they come to view that how they see something is the only morally legitimate way of viewing it, and everything else has to have some terrible motivation and label, and racist and xenophobic
Mhm.
and this and whatever other terrible thing they want, like as if they have some sort of their line of reason is the only one, or they have some kind of monopoly on truth or the only legitimate viewpoint. So I kind of hate where we're at, as a country in terms of that. And so maybe that might be the only thing that prevents me from doing that aspect of it. Because if I don't see things change, I mean, then maybe I wouldn't do it, because I like feeling warmth. I like feeling empathy. I like to be liked. I like to be loved, and I'm not willing to sacrifice that, in order to do this
Mhm.
last step if it's going to cost me that. You know, my loyalty is
Well,
to,
it's nice how
you know,
you.
I was going to say, my loyalty is to my conviction and what I think is right and wrong. And if in the process of that I lose people, or then I'll just take that. I'll take that hit. That's just the price that I pay for staying true to my
Mm. Mm.
convictions. But if it's not that, if it's just the other way that I'm expressing to you, that the other way, I'm not willing to do that. So I guess we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
that's beautiful. That's I think that should, that's the essence, certainly also of my agenda on this journey in life, is to, stand by my convictions. And, in what I do as a show host and an interviewer and also a mom. And, it's about owning my truth. And, you can lose things within the statement of owning your own truth, but not when you're stepping out of your truth. Then it's not worth it. And I think it's very beautiful what you said. Um, and based on what you said, I don't think you should get into into politics. I think you should go along the motivational speaking path. I think that you'll win millions of more people that way, because it's so much more true to you, is to, from what I'm feeling, from what I'm hearing. Politics just, I don't know. I think politics will always separate and divide. And, hearing what you're saying of just wanting to stay true to your heart and looking for the amiable and looking for the love. And, I think the motivational speaking side really resonates a lot more with your, your energy from what I'm hearing. Um, we're gonna lead towards rounding off, and you can send me all your contact details, so I can put that in the show notes so anyone listening can reach out to you. But you know, two questions actually. The one is, because of the position that you're in and the path now you've chosen, do you send, I'm just curious, do you send letters to all the prisoners saying, look, this is who I am, this is what happened to me, if you're right, please reach out to me? Like, do you do something like that?
No, they write me. I don't look for them. They look for me. So whenever I do media, traditional media, new media like this, or I'm in the news, I've become kind of like a quasi public figure.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of traditional media, and I do regularly meet with elected officials in New York, and also some in Pennsylvania and California. So, and I share my advocacy work, and through social media, and so friends, family, and advocates of people who allege that they're wrongfully imprisoned, they're aware of me, and
Mm-hmm.
they send those tips to the prisoners. Hey, you should try to get in touch with Jeff, and but besides that, I am well followed in the prison law library. I've become kind of a legend in the prison law library, in the prison system in general. I mean, I'm kind of like a legend, but you know, it it's a double edged sword, Jen, because you
Yeah.
know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and not just in New York but around the country. Even though the foundation website says that we're not, unless it's a DNA case, we're not able to take cases in the other states. We're only able to really take non-DNA cases in New York because it's really expensive to do an out-of-state non-DNA investigation. So even with having that,
Mm.
you know, we have this out-of-state um, file cabinet full of letters that have never been opened. They're all in alphabetical order from all across the country. Even in their desperation, everyone is writing me anyway, all having the thought, well, what happened to them is so extraordinary that that would knock our socks off, and we're going to wind up breaking our own rule. So there's them. And at one time, we had a 600 case backlog of just raw cases that we just are waiting for us to analyze it and just give it a thumbs up or thumbs down that we're going to work on it or not. Now we're down to 200, but there's 200 cases raw, and then we have 10 cases we're working on, but there's another 7 that are approved that we don't have the capacity
Yeah.
to work on. So unfortunately, it's hard to be the center of everybody's or a lot of people's hope, and knowing that that's not what my ability is. I don't have the resources necessary to try to screen through everything and work on everyone's case that deserves to have it, and that weighs on me. That weighs on
Mm.
me a lot. That it's a very difficult position to be in, and I think that people have, as many great things as I've gotten done. We talked about them getting 11 people home, passing the 8 laws. At the same time, you know, um, I do have limitations, and people think if they can just get in touch with me, then by this time next week they're going to be home. Then everything's going to be over, or that guy, or that I have the governor on speed dial, or I can. I don't. Okay, I'm just a one person that has a little bit of influence, and I can get them to
Mm.
do what I want about 1% of the time, and that's it. But people look at me in a different way. That's not realistic with what my abilities or resources are. I'm limited, and
Mm.
that part of it's hard. And every now and then somebody is exonerated, someone is released, and when I eventually see them, because everybody in this field eventually bumps into everybody, And and there is like an annual gathering called the Innocence Network Conference, that when there's not a pandemic, it's a gathering once a year that happens over 3 days. And a who's who in the field goes to
Mm.
this conference every year, and many exonerees go as well. And so every now and then,
Yeah.
people are exonerated. And when I bump into them, one of the ways that I mentioned to you, they say to me, "Yeah, I wrote you, but you guys never wrote me back." And I feel this big when that happens. But I try to explain.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did, but your letter was buried amongst hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters that everyone else is, and we're working with very limited resources. The Innocence Project has a 13, $14 million budget, and they have a backlog. They have a waiting list. We're working with even less resources this way, and so
Mhm. So maybe what's nice for, because sorry, it broke up there, but what I was saying is, because I think what a really big theme is also in your life story is certainly, and not just a theme, but I mean, it's um, your part of your signature, is certainly that ability to follow the breadcrumbs and to see the light of hope. And I think that that's really poignant to your journey. So, and that's what got you through, all these difficult times, and you had the muscle to continue to do that until the end. And maybe when these guys do write to you is to, just have a little breadcrumb that you can throw back to them, not to say, I've read your letter yet, but just to say I've received it. And, in a way, almost to summarize your story in what we've said, in the sense of how you managed to cope to get out yourself. But you can't help everyone, but at least you can relay the message to them that if they keep persisting and if they keep following the breadcrumbs, they will get out. If it's not through you, it will happen, so that you at least throw them back a breadcrumb, if anything. You know what I mean?
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Hmm.
So I'm going to end off on this question is, most people don't go to jail, thankfully. And most of the people listening to this aren't in jail and haven't been to jail. But the one metaphor I have used is the jail of one's own mind. What advice, having been someone who has physically been, locked up, um, what advice would you give to people who are in the jail within their own minds of life, to just give them a shimmer of hope?
I would say sometimes we think that there's no way out of something. We think that we're in an impossible position, but we're actually just in a very difficult position, not an impossible position. So I think that we make things worse sometimes, and sometimes there is a way out. So we need to look for that. We need to try many different ideas. We can't keep repeating the same tactics. You have to try vary your tactics. We need to study how other people in that position that we were in, how did other people make it out? So I mean that was part of what I did. And I would say also that just thinking how I can summarize this. When we're physically free, even if we're not free in our mind, you can still just walk. Sometimes you can just, if you don't like your life, you can still walk away from it. You don't have to continue in this, dead end job, or this life position that you actually can try to make your life differently. You can. And some people going extreme have. Some people have just disappeared and then just start a new life someplace else. I mean, that's extreme. I'm not advocating for that necessarily, But for some people, that's work. We're not that's work. We don't have to be tied in as much as we think. If you're struggling with some, this big payment for this house that you really can't afford, you don't have to keep on slaving and working 50, 60 hours a week just to barely get by, just to keep that going. There's ways to get out of that. There might be consequences. There might be a price to be paid, but sometimes just to have peace of mind, it's worth it to take those consequences on. I mean, I worked at a dead end job for 6 months. I hated getting up and going to work, and because it was a dead end job, I hated what I was doing, and I was miserable. But I made the decision. Look, I'm not
Mm.
doing this anymore. I'm going to quit that part of it. I'm just going to take the hit financially, and I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to come back out and see what the job market is like with a master's degree, and hopefully I can find something better than this. And I did, and that led to something better. So many times we put limits on ourselves. I mean, I put a limit on myself. When I was released at 32, I thought that I was too old to go back to college. That was something I wanted to do before. I thought I was too old, that ship sailed, but it didn't. But I had an intervention, though. There was a dean of a college that reached out to me that had lined up a scholarship for me. So I realized that it was not too late, and I made good on that, and I maximized that opportunity, and I springboard from that. I got the master's and the doctorate degree. I mean, excuse me, the law degree. So I think that sometimes we limit. Oh, I'm too old for this, or I should have did this or that when I'm younger. Yeah, but if you're not 95 years old, okay, if you still got your health, if you're not bedridden, it isn't too late. It's not. I wouldn't care if you're 70. I mean, just
Mm.
it's better. I believe in the idea that it's better late than never. But I think that we limit
Mm.
ourselves sometimes in that. So limiting beliefs sometimes can really can keep the cycle going. So I would consider that, and I would consider people to think outside the box. And just because something's never been done before doesn't mean you can't be the first one. Somebody did it first the first time, right? So our thinking, I think that our thinking, is is a factor, and being willing to take steps.
Mm. Nice, Jeffrey. Very cool. Nice to chat to you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well, and I hope that people get something out of this interview beyond just hearing an inspirational story. That it's instead they can latch on to some of these truths, some of these ways of thinking that I've outlined, and they can take it and apply it to their own life, or take it and modify it, adapt it to whatever life circumstance that they're in, and then move ahead, try to get to a better tomorrow. And that would mean the world to me. And a short message, even if someone has a success story on whatever level, that would really be so heartwarming for me. That would make everything, that in a way that would make everything worth it, in a way, to me. So hope
Yeah.
to hear from people that way. I mean, people can email me through my website. I know you're going to put the links up, but just verbally, www.deskovic.org. There's an email form that people can email me. I have a public figure page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. So I do check my messages there. And those would all be ways that people could send a short message to me, because often the trail of living a meaningful life, an advocate's trail, or doing something trailblazing or difficult, the road is often long, hard, and lonely. And so, messages of inspiration or appreciation, or sharing some good, hey, I heard you when I did this, I did that. That's all additional fuel for me to keep going in my life journey, and whatever particulars or specifics that entails. So all those things strengthen me for the cause. So really, in many ways, I mean, it's not really about me because I'm home, I'm free, and I don't think I'll ever be in that position. It's about the other people I metaphorically left behind. But at the same time, in a type of paradox, in a way, it's as much about me and for me as it is about other people because, I do get some non tangible but very important things out of it. You know,
Well, this is
just
your
share my heart and
this
my person with the world, I guess, in the end. This is who Jeff Deskovic
Yeah,
is.
well, you
doing that, and I'm very grateful that you reached out to us at Inspirational Interviews, and yeah, it's a just beautiful conversation, and yeah, thank you for for being bold to go out there and share your story because it does change people's lives. Stories change lives, and it's a privilege for me to hear your story. So thank you so much.
Definitely welcome, and thank you for sharing your platform with me this morning so that I can reach your audience.
Pleasure, Jeffrey.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
So, Jeffrey, just don't forget, don't hang up. Don't hang. You can hang up, but don't
I will not
close the
hang up. We're
screen.
not losing all this wonderful content. That's not going to happen, okay?
So listen, I'll be in contact. I'll be in contact with you this week and just touch base with you again because we've had such a nice and heartfelt conversation. I don't like to just suddenly disappear. So I'll be in contact with you this week again.
Looking forward to that. That's wonderful. All right. Bye for
All right. Take care. Have a good day.
You too.
In New York. Okay. Bye.
Why don't we go there?